The other day, my friend JJ McCullough sent me this, an image from the White House account posted to Instagram and Twitter parodying the Polar Express as a meme about deportation. The text on the meme says, "Here illegally, the Deportation Express. This holiday season, believe you can go home." Because Christmas isn't about taking in and caring for the needy, no. It's just the opposite. And I want to thank the White House for reminding us of that. Unsurprisingly, the post got a lot of backlash. As Indy 100 reported, political commentator Richard Angwin described the campaign as a grotesque mockery of Christmas. Similarly, an article from Unilad called the ad sickening and pointed out that 75,000 ICE detainees, a third of those arrested from January 20th to October 15th of this year, had no criminal records. Even many Republicans are becoming wary of Kristi Noem and DHS's tactics. And as far as their social media tactics go, this is just embarrassing. It's not even clever, which is the case with every terrible campaign they've run. It's hardly any wonder why Sabrina Carpenter ratioed the White House account into oblivion. Does anyone else find it a little ironic that the party who supposedly doesn't want politics in their media keeps on injecting politics into media that has nothing to do with them? Of course, that's all part of the point. They want people to be triggered, for lack of a better term, so they get more attention. But it just feels so especially heinous with the Polar Express, specifically because the original source material is about as bipartisan as it gets. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying the Polar Express is apolitical. I've said it before, but every story is technically political. All literature is about what it means to be human. In general, a story exists to explore morals, and these days, more than ever, our morals are inseparable from our politics. I was just talking about this with my friend Alora Young, who mentioned German playwright Bertolt Brecht. To quote Brecht directly, the representation of human behavior from a social point of view is meant indeed to have a decisive influence on the spectator's own social behavior. This sort of intervention necessarily is bound to release emotional effects. They are deliberate and have to be controlled. Worth noting that the words social and society come from the same Latin root, socius, which means friend or companion. If stories are meant to affect our social behavior, then they're also meant to affect society at large, no? We strive to become better people to create a better society, and isn't that what politics is all about? The effort to create the best society possible? So when I say the Polar Express is bipartisan, I mean it's a story with a moral that both sides of the political aisle would find no fault in and understand. And that, I feel, is why the book persists after all these years. It's a story that anyone can relate to, and we do. I do largely feel the movie has overshadowed the book in public consciousness, which certainly isn't uncommon for movies based off books. So today, as I've done multiple times before, I want to revisit the children's classic. I want to look through the eyes of an adult to see what details stick out and what new meaning the story takes on, if any. Normally, in doing videos like these, I would read the whole text and then jump into the analysis. But the Polar Express is pretty long for a children's book, so I'm going to break things into sections. We'll read a few pages at a time and I'll pause for commentary and analysis. I'm operating under the assumption that you likely already know the story in full, so I imagine this won't be a problem. Sorry if you're not familiar with the story, but I promise you'll still enjoy the video. Oh, and lastly, I'll point out there are some differences in text between my version and the version you're seeing on screen. This was just the best thing to do visually, but I apologize for the inconsistencies there. Without further ado, let's jump into The Polar Express by Chris Van Allsburg. On Christmas Eve many years ago, I lay quietly in my bed. I did not rustle the sheets. I breathed slowly and silently. I was listening for a sound a friend had told me I'd never hear, the ringing bells of Santa's sleigh. There is no Santa, my friend had insisted, but I knew he was wrong. Late that night, I did hear sounds, though not of ringing bells. From outside came the sounds of hissing steam and squeaking metal. I looked through my window and saw a train standing perfectly still in front of my house. It was wrapped in an apron of steam. Snowflakes fell lightly around it. A conductor stood at the open door of one of the cars. He took a large pocket watch from his vest, then looked up at my window. I put on my slippers and robe. I tiptoed downstairs and out the door. "All aboard!" the conductor cried out. I ran up to him. "Well," he said, "are you coming?" "Where?" I asked. "Why, to the North Pole, of course," was his answer. "This is the Polar Express." I took his outstretched hand and he pulled me aboard. So in just 2 pages, there's already a lot to unpack. Now, as far as hooks go, I honestly don't think our opening sentence is anything special, but it's necessary establishment. It's in the next 2 sentences where the real intrigue kicks in. When the speaker says they breathe slowly and silently, the reader has to wonder why. It almost sounds like our main character is in a quiet place type scenario, but obviously it's much more innocent than that. Our speaker says they're listening for Santa, the bells of his sleigh specifically, because his friend told him Santa didn't exist. This is an extremely effective way to establish a character arc. And what's interesting is our speaker is ultimately proven right. It's a risky play writing the story of a character who ultimately doesn't change, but we'll talk about how Chris Van Allsburg keeps things interesting. Speaking of Chris, you might recognize that name from other picture books like Jumanji and Zathura, projects which also had film adaptations. As with the Polar Express, the artwork in those books feels otherworldly. In the same way that it's uncanny to see outer space out the window or monkeys in the kitchen, there's a strangeness and mysticism to seeing a locomotive in the middle of a snowy suburban street. Its presence looks slightly intimidating in all honesty, but the language helps us understand that this is not a threatening presence. Look at this sentence. It was wrapped in an apron of steam. What lovely figurative language and word choice. Think about what associations the word apron might bring to mind. For me, the first person I think of who wears an apron would be my mom. Aside from parents, folks who wear aprons might include chefs, bakers, artists, and gardeners. So all in all, an apron is a pretty non-threatening symbol, no? And then there's the word steam as opposed to the word smoke, which has a much more negative connotation. It's a small, simple sentence, but unbelievably effective, in my opinion. The following sentence emphasizes how harmless the train really is. Snowflakes fell lightly around it. It's as if the train is meant to be here. It's not obstructing a thing. The snow continues falling. Nothing is out of the ordinary. Then there's the character of the conductor. In the movie, the conductor is kind of a strange presence, a somewhat imposing adult authority figure, though ultimately a force for good. I think here in the book, the conductor is much more unambiguously good. The last line on this page makes that all too clear. I took his outstretched hand and he pulled me aboard. The outstretched hand as a symbol is, to reuse the word, an unambiguous sign of help, support, and allyship. One last thought I had here while reading as an adult was just how easily this could all be very sinister with a few changes in tone. Like, this is basically a kidnapping, no? But ultimately, it's the wonder, whimsy, and imagination that keeps the story in a positive realm. Despite how eerie this premise is and how intimidating the train might seem, it's clear that this is a story about childhood for children. And I've talked about this before in pretty much every children's lit video I've done, but the truth is, children love at least a bit of weirdness in their stories. That's a big part of what children's fiction is for, to explore all the strangeness going through a child's mind all the time. But let's get back to the text. The next page reads, "The train was filled with other children, all in their pajamas and nightgowns. We sang Christmas carols and ate candies with nougat centers as white as snow. We drank hot cocoa as thick and rich as melted chocolate bars." Outside, the lights of towns and villages flickered in the distance as the Polar Express raced northwards. Soon there were no more lights to be seen. We traveled through cold, dark forests where lean wolves roamed and white-tailed rabbits hid from our train as it thundered through the quiet wilderness. We climbed mountains so high it seemed as if we would scrape the moon, but the Polar Express never slowed down. Faster and faster we ran along, rolling over peaks and through valleys like a car on a roller coaster. The mountains turned into hills, the hills into snow-covered plains. We crossed a barren desert of ice, the great polar ice cap. Lights appeared in the distance. They looked like the lights of a strange ocean liner sailing on a frozen sea. "There," said the conductor, "is the North Pole." Okay, I have a lot less to say about these pages than the first two, but there are a few things I want to highlight, mostly the figurative language. The phrases, nougat centers as white as snow, mountains so high it seemed as if we would scrape the moon, and they looked like the lights of a strange ocean liner sailing on a frozen sea. All of these similes are effective in their own way. That last one especially gets me. Seeing the city in the North Pole is as magical as seeing man-made lights out on the open water. I do also want to point out how the Polar Express never stops. It's a direct trip all the way straight to the North Pole, an aspect of the story that subtly adds to the surrealism. I think the real effectiveness of these paragraphs is the ambiance, which the similes just enhance. The contrast between the inside of the Polar Express and the outside is so interesting, especially since both scenes are gorgeous. The language describing the woods, cold, dark forests where lean wolves roamed and white-tailed rabbits hid from our train as it thundered through the quiet wilderness. Talk about atmosphere. This is a case where the text enhances the illustrations, which I feel is the most you can ask for from a picture book. You don't just want the pictures doing the heavy lifting, you want both pieces working hand in hand. We'll move on from there. The North Pole. It was a huge city standing alone at the top of the world, filled with factories where every Christmas toy was made. At first we saw no elves. They are gathering at the center of the city, the conductor told us. This is where Santa will give the first gift of Christmas. Who receives the first gift? We all asked. He will choose one of you. Look, shouted one of the children, the elves. Outside we saw hundreds of elves. As our train drew closer to the center of the North Pole, we slowed to a crawl, so crowded were the streets with Santa's helpers. When the Polar Express could go no further, we stopped, and the conductor led us outside. We pressed through the crowds to the edge of a large open circle. In front of us stood Santa's sleigh. The reindeer were excited. They pranced and paced, ringing the silver sleigh bells that hung from their harnesses. It was a magical sound, like nothing I'd ever heard. Across the circle, the elves moved apart and Santa Claus appeared. The elves cheered wildly. He marched over to us and, pointing to me, said, "Let's have this fellow here." He jumped into his sleigh. The conductor handed me up. I sat on Santa's knee and he asked, "Now, what would you like for Christmas?" I knew that I could have any gift I could imagine, but the thing I wanted most for Christmas was not inside Santa's giant bag. What I wanted more than anything was one silver bell from Santa's sleigh. When I asked, Santa smiled. Then he gave me a hug and told an elf to cut a bell from a reindeer's harness. The elf tossed it up to Santa. He stood, holding the bell high above him, and called out, "The first gift of Christmas!" A clock struck midnight as the elves roared their approval. Santa handed the bell to me, and I put it in my dressing gown pocket. The conductor helped me down from the sleigh. Santa shouted out the reindeers' names and cracked his whip. His team charged forward and climbed into the air. Santa circled once above us, then disappeared in the cold, dark polar sky. Now, what first strikes me most about these pages would be the depiction of the North Pole. Nowadays, we have several fictional depictions of the Winter Wonderland, but back in 1985, I feel this would have been unique. An entire city that's absolutely crawling with elves, all of whom work in factories where the toys are made. How fascinating. I don't think I've ever seen a more crowded depiction of the North Pole. Oftentimes, it's just a workshop, and that's it. Then, of course, there's the sleigh bells, which our narrator describes as having a magical sound like nothing I'd ever heard. And given that the story opened with our speaker listening for the sleigh bells, receiving the bell as a gift is extremely poetic. We presume, as an audience, that the main character here wants to show the sleigh bell to his friend to prove Santa's existence. But we'll talk more about that later. It's quite a humble gift when you think about it. The narrator even says that he knew he could have any gift he could imagine, and yet all he wants is a bell. Part of me thinks that's exactly why Santa chose him to receive the first gift of Christmas. There's a tenderness in Santa's characterization, the way he gives a hug to our narrator. Much like the conductor, we have a wholly good adult figure here. What a delightful depiction of Santa, utterly wholesome. Oh, and speaking of the conductor, notice how he helps the narrator up onto Santa's lap, then down from the sleigh. Again, it's just so wholesome. With that, let's finish this wintry, wondrous tale. As soon as we were back inside the Polar Express, the other children asked to see the bell. I reached into my pocket, but the only thing I felt was a hole. I had lost the silver bell from Santa Claus's sleigh. "Let's hurry outside and look for it," one of the children said. But the train gave a sudden lurch and started moving. We were on our way home. It broke my heart to lose the bell. When the train reached my house, I sadly left the other children. I stood at my doorway and waved goodbye. The conductor said something from the moving train, but I couldn't hear him. "What?" I yelled out. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "Merry Christmas!" he shouted. The Polar Express let out a loud blast from its whistle and sped away. On Christmas morning, my little sister Sarah and I opened our presents. When it looked as if everything had been unwrapped, Sarah found one last small box behind the tree. It had my name on it. Inside was the silver bell. There was a note. Found this on the seat of my sleigh. Fix that hole in your pocket. Signed, Mr. C. I shook the bell. It made the most beautiful sound my sister and I had ever heard. But my mother said, "Oh, that's too bad." "Yes," said my father. "It's broken." When I'd shaken the bell, my parents had not heard a sound. At one time, most of my friends could hear the bell, but as the years passed, it fell silent for all of them. Even Sarah found one Christmas that she could no longer hear its sweet sound. Though I've grown old, the bell still rings for me, as it does for all who truly believe. So the immediate question upon finishing the book as an adult and a former English major would be, what does the bell represent? And frankly, I think it's pretty clear, but I'm going to let the author explain it for himself. To quote Chris Van Allsburg, "As children, we did not grow up steadily, one day at a time. Occasionally we would leap forward, getting separated from our mother in the supermarket and, holding panic at bay, finding her on our own, could make us instantly feel a year older. It is the same way we felt when we rode off alone on a bicycle for the first time. While most of these experiences left me exhilarated, there was one leap forward that produced less welcome emotions. When I was 8 years old, I began to consider the possibility that Santa Claus was not real. Embracing this suspicion made me feel grown up, very suddenly, and also very unhappily. Leaving behind a belief in Santa meant I would never again experience the enchantment that accompanied the days leading up to Christmas. The exquisite, almost unbearable anticipation of a fairy tale coming to life, a fairy tale that included me, would be gone forever. This didn't feel like growing up. This felt like losing something, like being thrown out of the land of miracles and hearing the gates close behind me. I wanted back in. Fortunately, the Polar Express pulled up to my house that Christmas, taking me on a trip that did lead me back. There is a seat on the train for you. All aboard, Chris Van Allsburg. Based on that statement, it would seem to me the bell represents a certain childlike wonder, one that's easier to lose with each day that passes. If you'll recall, the narrator was specifically listening for sleigh bells to prove Santa's reality to himself. And, as I mentioned, the reader presumes the narrator wants to bring back a bell to prove Santa's existence. But the irony is, for those who don't believe, the bell won't make a sound anyhow. And there's something tragic about that, especially since the narrator said the bell made such a distinctively beautiful sound. But I think this interpretation of the bell also says something about the nature of belief. Perhaps that belief starts with a desire to believe. Or maybe a general belief starts with a belief in yourself. If you want to believe in magic, if you want to believe the world can be a magical place, you first have to believe yourself capable of that belief. Sorry if that's too layered, but I think the point comes across, no? Assuming this interpretation is correct, it's so significant that there's a moment where the narrator thinks he's lost the bell. One of the children suggests they hurry outside and look for it, but the train starts moving just as soon as they make the suggestion. The implication is it's too late. The narrator has lost something precious to him, and there is no time or way to recover it. But in the end, he absolutely does recover it, all thanks to the belief that allows him to hear its sound in the first place. This is largely how Van Allsburg keeps things interesting despite the narrator's views remaining unchallenged throughout the story. To me, the clear implication is that a childlike sense of wonder is something we don't have to lose forever. We may lose it for a time, but it's never too late to recover it. I opened this video talking about the White House's ghoulish use of this property to try and promote deportation. Sometimes it feels like the more I look around, the worse the world is at large, with this post being just one example of how bad things can be. Times are constantly changing, which is something we're not so aware of when we're children. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we should be ignorant or naive. What I am advocating for is exactly what's at the heart of the Polar Express: belief and wonder. We can acknowledge how bad things are while still holding on to a belief that they will get better. This year marks the Polar Express's 40th anniversary. For the occasion, Van Allsburg's editor, Bethany Vignatero, told Publishers Weekly, quote, "I am not overstating it when I say that the Polar Express is more than a book. It's an indelible part of so many families' holiday traditions. The ubiquity of the book, the film, Polar Express train rides, and themed reading events are part of the fabric of Christmas. But more than anything, in a season that inspires and requires magic, it makes believers of us all." For all the world's faults, I feel the Christmas season is special. The world just seems a little brighter. People feel a little kinder. And maybe I'm just delusional for thinking so. But as Vignetero stated, this is a season that inspires and requires magic, and I don't think a belief in magic is such a silly thing. For that same article, Van Allsburg said, "I think the book's melancholy mood and retrospection resonates with adults. This quality grows out of the story's ending, of course, and is reinforced by what is, for a Christmas story, a rather somber palette. Children are responding to a story that is told by someone who has actually been to the North Pole to meet Santa Claus and has the sleigh bell to prove it. Maybe some snowy Christmas Eve the train will stop for them." We live in a world that is melancholy and somber, a world that creates retrospection within us. But at the same time, it's an amazing world filled with beauty and wonder and hope. Again, you can call me naive, but I do what I can to make the world a better place, even if my efforts alone seem small. And a large part of how I keep my childhood wonder alive is by reading and writing. I love flexing my creative muscles through video analyses like these and my own creative pursuits. And I would imagine Van Allsburg feels similarly. In an interview with WMUK, Van Allsburg revealed that he didn't even know the story would be a Christmas story when he first thought of it. He was simply prompted by the image in his mind of a train standing still in a wooded area. To hear him tell it,
"As an image by itself, I found that provocative, so I imagined myself approaching the train and wondering why the train was there. And as I approached it, I started thinking about, well, maybe this is a train that's actually waiting for me, and what's unusual about the train is that it can go anywhere. And then I thought a little bit longer about it, and I said, well, if this is a train that can go anywhere, and it's winter, where would I want to go?" Once I got to the point that I believed this train that I was imagining could take me anywhere, and it would take me north, it seemed to be a story that was completed with that simple idea. It may sound kind of corny, but, the story seemed to be waiting there for me. In that sense, it felt more like I was remembering something than that I was making something up, that it was always in my head.
I always love hearing authors explaining their processes, and this one is so interesting. What a fascinating description of imagination as a memory rather than a pure invention. I hope going into next year, you will focus on the things you imagine and the things you believe in. Remember that you can make the world a better place through your sense of wonder. Even if that wonder sustains you alone, I assure you, that is making the world a better place. And I hope this Christmas season, you can hear the silver bell for yourself. As always, I want to take this time to thank my patrons. I genuinely could not do this without them. If you want to support the channel, see videos early, and get access to the community Discord, you can join the Patreon for as little as $3 a month. If you want to support the channel in other important ways, doing all the algorithm things really helps a lot. Liking, commenting, hyping, subscribing, waiting till January to eat the snowflakes, honoring Christmas all year round, spreading Christmas cheer by singing loud for all to hear, the usual stuff. You can follow me on my socials if you want, but no matter what, keep reading, keep writing, and ultimately, keep in mind, this is a rough draft. And for sticking around this long, here's a writing prompt for you. Think about something you believed in as a child and write a poem describing it to the best of your ability. It could be Santa or another holiday figure, an imaginary friend, a misconception that you had, a fear you held, magical creatures, or even some cosmology or higher power. Anything you can recall. And as a little added bonus, I think it would be easy to make a poem like this about disillusionment or the loss of innocence or whatever. I challenge you to write this poem with a positive slant. So, get to writing.